punchline here, Pastor.
Start over.
Yeah, no, I'm not starting over. I've only got 30 minutes. Okay. Dude, I'm Steve, a retired airline pilot. He says, okay, consult the list. He goes, oh, yeah, great. Here you are, Steve. Take this silken robe and this golden staff and enter the kingdom. The pilot goes into heaven with robe and staff. Next, it's the priest's turn. He stands erect and booms out, I'm Father Bob, pastor of St. Mary's for the last 43 years. St. Peter consults his list. He says to the priest, take this cotton robe and this wooden staff and enter the kingdom. The priest says, wait a minute, hold it. He goes, that man was a pilot. He gets a silken robe and a golden staff. I only get cotton and wood. How can this be? St. Peter says, up here, we go by results. When you preached, people slept. When he flew, they prayed. I got a lot of people praying that I don't put you to sleep in these next few minutes this morning. But I do want to do the trivia real quick. Are there any founding members from your church here today? Anybody here part of the founding group of this? Okay, you won't believe this, or maybe you will. I actually knew about this church before you did. I actually was praying with your planting pastor and read copies. This church was actually planted as a dissertation project as we were working towards doctorate degrees in Phoenix Seminary. Ted Weesty was a classmate and asked me to actually read a couple of chapters. We talked, I prayed, and heard the story of this thing getting planted. So it's so amazing, the overlapping paths. Jennifer, Johnny's wife, Jennifer's dad's one of my best friends. We've been friends for, 15 years now, probably? Anyway, it's great to see you here, my friend. Okay, so let's dive in. A little bit more trivia. Do you know what the second best-selling Christian book of all time is? The first still remains the Bible, yes. But you know what the second is? Mere Christianity is a great guess and certainly would be second on my list. But it's not the one. Does anybody know? You ever heard of a book called The Purpose-Driven Life? The Purpose-Driven Life. It actually just was updated. There's a new 25th anniversary edition that came out earlier this year. I pulled it out. This is the original because I gave mine away. So many people wanted to go through it with me. It's a great book, especially as you're doing a series on Revitalize. I'm going to show you one. I think this is fantastic in just a second. But here's one other book. One other book. I'm not endorsing this because of the theology of the author. This is called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Anybody here not heard of that book? Do you remember what the second habit is? The second of 7 habits of highly effective people. Guess. You remember any of them? Be proactive is one. The second one, though, is begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. What is the end of the spiritual life? What was the intended end of God saving you? Have you thought much about this? Yeah, a quote that has haunted me this year is one by Socrates, that the beginning of wisdom is defining your terms. Beginning with the end in mind. What is this about? What are we trying to accomplish? What would it look like if you were revitalized through this series as we come out of this pandemic? Well, let me give you the reason I think this Purpose-Driven Life is so good. The first 3 words of the first chapter, the first page, the Purpose-Driven Life, is worth the price of the book. But you don't have to go buy it because I'm about to give them to you, okay? And here's the key, I think, to beginning with the end in mind for you as a church. It's not about you. At the end of the day, God didn't save you for you. I'm going to invite you to join me today in a passage that I think is just one of many that reflects this sentiment. It's going to be familiar. This is not, I'm a very bottom shelf kind of guy. I've got way too much education that I don't use, my wife says. But we're going to be real simple. We're going to be real brief. But we're going to look, basically we're going to focus on one verse, but because I'm a Dallas Seminary graduate, I'm going to have to give you the whole context. So if you'll join me, if you've got a Bible, or if you still use an electronic device to get to the scriptures, but please join me in Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4, we're going to read quickly verses 18 through 22, but we're going to focus on Matthew 4:19. And here's what I think we're going to discover. There's a silver bullet for the spiritual life captured in this one verse. You know what I mean by silver bullet? C.S. Lewis would have said it a different way. It said if you put first things first, you get second things also. Meaning if you shoot for the right things, you get kind of multiple collateral benefits. And I think there's an overlooked emphasis here in this one verse that for me has certainly been transformative in my own spiritual journey, and I hope it might be for you today. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 begins this way. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they too left the boat and their father and followed him. I'd love for you to join me for the next few minutes, and let's focus on 4 questions. What did Jesus call those guys to? For what? Why? And how? Does that make sense? So let's begin with the what. What does he say? He says, come, follow me. This is a call not to follow him on Facebook or friend him on Twitter or any of that stuff. This is a call to come, follow me. He called these men to come and be with him. They immediately put down their nets. They put down their vocation. They left their lives as they knew them to come and be a companion with him. For him to become their main thing. This was a call to intimacy that ultimately would result in imitation. See, the reality is in that day, and the word that's often used in the Bible, but we don't use it as much these days around church anymore, it's a call to discipleship. To discipleship. It's a call to come as a student, as a pupil, as an apprentice, as a learner, as a trainee. Come be with me that you will, over time, in intimacy with me, become like me. And don't we become like who we're with? You parents, isn't that why you want to know who your kids' friends are? Because they rub off, don't they? We become like who we're with. Here's a call to these hardy professional fishermen to come be with me. And over time, you will begin to look and think and prioritize and decide and act like me. Are you becoming like him? Do you think about that very much? At the end in mind, if he's calling you, is he calling you? Maybe some of you think, well, that was then, and those guys were just those guys, and they ended up being apostles, and they're real special dudes and all that. But you know what? The call to come, the call to follow. Jesus had that call almost 20 times throughout the Gospels. To other individuals and to groups of people, come, follow me. Come, take up your cross. I see that in your lobby out there. Luke 9:23 and 24, come take up your cross. Follow me. This call is repeated over and over throughout the Gospels. This theme of pulling up side next to Jesus and to learn from him. But not just to learn head knowledge, but to become like him. To be skilled. Yesterday, if you would have been at my house, you'd have seen a clumsy guy that's getting a little old to do this when nobody else is at home, putting up ceiling fans out on my back deck, okay? I am not an electrician. I spend most of my time with books, okay? but I you know what? I said, well, my wife kind of threatens my manhood if I don't just try some of this stuff. So I literally get out there and I'm going, oh boy, this is going to be really fun. But as I go through and really just kind of get over the fear of it, it went great. And I realized as I'm about halfway through this that, you know what, where did I get the aptitude to even figure this stuff out? Well, my dad is the son of a West Texas farmer rancher. My grandfather, his dad, discipled him in how to fix stuff, how to figure out mechanical things. My grandfather truly, he could fix anything mechanical with a pair of pliers and baling wire. I mean, I saw him do it on multiple occasions when I was a kid. My dad was the same way. He was not a skilled blue-collar tradesman. He was a sales guy. But my dad could just dive in there and figure stuff out. He had an aptitude he learned from his father Some of that has rubbed off on me with those hours we spent together. Christ was calling these guys. Christ calls us as people that know him through our confidence in him being the way, the truth, and the life, the only way to get to God. He calls us to be more than just believers in him, but to become like him over time as we pull up close through his word in the company of people that want to do the same. He'll rub off on you. Is he? You ever done an inventory on that? You know, the best way to check that out is to ask those that know you best, whether it's spouses or parents or coworkers. Hey, are you seeing any positive change in me? You know what I mean? Am I any different this year than I was a year ago? Do you see any more love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control? Do you see any of those fruits of the Spirit? Because those are character traits that Jesus embraced fully and exhibited completely, perfectly. Do you see any more of that in me? Do you see any more of a burden in me for the hurting and the outcast and the marginalized people? Do you see that? Do you see Christ emerging in me? We become like who we're with, folks. Are you following? Are you in his word? Are you in the company? I know we've had a year of isolation from one another, from gathering, and that mutual benefit of just the energy of being next to somebody else that reminds you of Jesus. And how energizing that can be. Well, here we're back. It's go time. It's go time. Together to become more like Christ. Follow me, and I will make you something. To what? We're to follow him to what? To fish for men. To fish for men. What does that mean? To angle for others. To go out there and entice folks. Of course, he's using the metaphor that would be so helpful and instructive to these guys who were professional fishermen. Right? So he's just trying to say, man, with the same kind of mindset and the same kind of emphasis as you applied yourself as fishermen, I want you to fish for men and women lost, people in the depths of despair and depression, desperation in some cases, chemical and drug dependence in others. I want you to go get them, to entice them from that to the only name under heaven by which men and women are saved. God intends for us to fish. Do you fish? Do you know what I mean by that? Do you share your faith? When's the last time you had a spiritual conversation with someone? Particularly somebody that you're not sure if they even know Jesus or not. Or maybe you're sure they don't. Maybe it's that new Muslim family down the street or your Hindu neighbor. When's the last time you had a spiritual conversation? It's fascinating to me as I'm reading the statistics. I read a book last summer with a bunch of guys, and in this book, a guy named Jim Stump, who was a minister, kind of a Young Life type guy on the Stanford University campus for 60 years. His ministry consisted of loving and leading the student athletes at Stanford University to come to and become like Jesus. That was the mission statement of his little ministry. Jim Stump wrote this book called The Power of One-on-One. It's really good. It's really good. But in the book, Jim says, you know what? In my experience and what I've read, less than 1 in 10 Christians have ever fished. With any regularity, have ever shared their faith. Do you fish? Maybe it's because of our following. Let me go back to following. I think we've got this confusion in the church these days. I think we've confused following with being a fan. A fan of Jesus rather than a friend. You know what I mean by fans, right? People that just come, enthusiastic admirers. We build stadiums and concert venues, and you come and you're fired up, whether it's the greatest new country band or whether it's this, amazing orator. You come, they sweat, they spit, they give it everything they've got, and we sit, and we applaud, and we consume. And we say, entertain me, but don't expect anything from me. Inspire, enlighten me, but do not inconvenience me. My concern is our churches are too full of fans and not enough followers. Why do I say that? Because I don't see many fishermen and fisherwomen out there. People energized and actively offering their hope to a hopeless culture, right? A culture that is drifting rapidly in the wrong direction. Do you fish? What does that say about your following? These are the kind of questions that really haunt me. So rather than enthusiastic admirers, what Christ has called us to and calling you and I to is being an engaged apprentice. To really be engaged. And it starts with this. Do you engage in this? You know that biblical illiteracy is declining almost as fast as church attendance in our culture. And did everybody read in the last couple of weeks that church attendance in America for the first time has fallen below 50% in America? Up in Collin County, where I live, the last census showed that there were 29% of the residents of Collin County that identified themselves as having no religious affiliation. No religious affiliation. Also, we found out that just at 20%, now these are pre-COVID, pre-pandemic numbers, that just right at 20% of Collin County residents attended church. There's more people with no religious affiliation than there are people that attend church. Folks, the world that we're living in is changing. The culture is changing. And the biblical illiteracy, the ability to just read this and be able to think the way it teaches you to think, is going away as the dust gathers on these. Are you a fan or are you a follower? Because if you're a fan, you probably don't fish. Because what have you got to share? What have you got? You're afraid that somebody's going to ask a question you don't know the answer to. You're afraid of intruding and being intrusive and being insensitive and being politically incorrect. So intimidation, I think, keeps a lot of us out of with our hands off the fishing net, so to speak. But anyway, so for what? For fishing. I think fishing is more than floating. See, I grew up in a church that absolutely clearly emphasized and underscored it is by grace you are saved by faith. It is not of yourselves. It's the gift of God, lest ye boast. The emphasis on grace called me to respond to this incredibly amazing love and free gift that God gave me that I certainly didn't deserve and could not earn. But there's more to the spiritual life than spiritual birth. God wants us to grow up, not grow old. And I think the silver bullet that's been missing is the emphasis on fishing. Followers fish. If you're not fishing, you're probably not following very well. You're probably not growing up. You're probably growing old. If Christ is your main thing, see, I don't think he was calling those guys to be the first professional Christians, the first professional pastors. I think he was calling those guys to make Jesus their main thing, their main interest, their main influence, if you will. And I'll tell you what, my wife, who's not with us today, she's up with our granddaughter. Our granddaughter is singing in church today, 2 years old. She's singing at the choir at First Baptist Church in Heron, Illinois. My wife said, I'm sorry, I love you, but I'm going to see the granddaughter. So anyway, but my wife used to be a marathon runner. I mean, she ran like 13, 14 marathons, ran Boston twice, ran Dallas 8 times. In her running days, running was a main thing in her life. Running had an impact not just on her hours in her day, but how she ate, how she slept, especially to get to Boston, because you have to qualify to get to Boston Marathon. So there was absolutely some performance markers that had to be met or surpassed to get there. So running was a main thing. It took time, it took energy, it took money, it took focus. The call to follow, the call to discipleship is a call to prioritize. And folks, we live in a culture where the average person, young and old these days, spends at least 4 hours a day staring at a screen of some sort. We're getting a lot of time with the culture. We're getting a lot of influence from the culture because of that time. Are you offsetting that? Are you de-brainwashing yourself from that with some time in this? With some time with these? That's a recipe. And the result of that, I guarantee you, the result of that will be, if you really are following and leaning into Jesus, you will become like him. And one of the things that was priority in his life, he came not to be served, but to serve, and lives after ransom for many. He was constantly fishing. He was constantly focused on the marginalized, the outcast. He was constantly reaching out and inviting in. Yes? And to the extent that running became my wife's main thing, she not only did it and spent a lot of time on it, she talked a lot about it. She could tell you the latest, greatest running shoes. You know, she could tell you the latest, greatest running program. She could tell you all these different, it was her thing. Is Christ your thing? My prayer for you this week, there's one other piece of trivia I want to come back to, but my prayer for you this week, in addition to this trivia one I'm going to go to in a second, my prayer for you this week is that Christ would become such a central part of your life and your interests that talking about him would just be as natural as talking about the best restaurant you've been to in the last month. See, I don't know about you, but I'm an evangelist. I'm an evangelist about anything that I like. Anything that's really great, I'm going to tell you about it. I just told you about these books. That's the way I am, isn't it? You can ask my son who's with me. I'm just that way. I see something. If it's awesome, I'm going to tell you, this is awesome. You need this. You ought to try this. This is great. And I have the joy and the privilege of vocationally these days spending half my time investing in followers and helping them bring Jesus so much to the center of their life that sharing him just becomes spontaneous. It's organic. We are, Search Ministries is all about relational apologetic evangelism. That's what it says on the billboard and all that. But the reality is what it really is about is organic evangelism. Just making your passion and your pursuit of Christ so central that you can't help but share it. And then it becomes so natural. It's as natural as being a Dallas Cowboy fan, which there's fewer of those these days too, of course. But does that make sense? Does this make sense to you? Anyway, so we got followers, we got fishing. Why do we need this message? I think there's two reasons that I need to share this with you. I'm going to keep track of the time here. Okay. Now I'm going to have to hurry. All right. Two reasons. One is for their sake. Folks, not only are there more and more nuns, and I don't mean with the hats, I mean no religious affiliation folks. Not only is the culture moving further away, but also the message of Christianity, the central message of the Christian faith is absolutely counterintuitive, countercultural, and counter the message of every other world religion, and even some religions that call themselves Christian. What do I mean by that? Your intuition, the culture says, how do you get ahead in life? By being good, by being the best. It's performance driven, right? I get to ask the question of people all over the county now, regularly ask the question, if there's a heaven, how do you get in? If there's a heaven, how do you get in? It's a great question because it's so diagnostic. And I'm going to tell you what, the answer more and more often is some version of by being good. God's a good God, heaven's a good place, you got to be good to get to God. That seems logical. And it seems cultural. The better performers get the more merit raises, right? That's how you get the bonus. That's how you get the promotion. And if you know any Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists or Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, if you know any of these folks, that their answer to that question will be by being this, by being a good Muslim, a good Mormon, a good, sometimes even a good Methodist. Does that make sense? That's not grace. That's works. So they need to hear the gospel. This is a call to be more than just being nice to your neighbor, and trying to show them the gospel without ever telling them. They've got to hear it because it doesn't make sense. Does it make sense to you? Because here's been the other wild experience I've had since leaving the pulpit and getting back out there on the pavement. I'm amazed at how many churched people How many people inside the church that when I asked them the question, this happened last week at a diner up in Prosper, Texas, with this group of guys that I've been meeting with kind of this whole school year. And one of them's a firefighter, so this poor guy's schedule keeps him from coming regularly. And so he comes in, and the question, I'm actually asking the question to the waitress, because she's been kind of listening over our shoulders over the last couple of months and leaning in and asking a couple. So I just asked her, hey, if there's a heaven, how do you get in? And the firefighter jumps in and goes, well, I'm not sure, because I've tried to be a good dad and a good church. And then here he goes. And the guy that started this group and pulled all these people together, he's over there gasping, goes, I really thought he got this. I thought he had heard this before. So folks, the message needs to be heard, not just out there, but in here. One other reason we need to fish, one other we need to look hard at our following and see the fishing as kind of part and parcel with that, is because there's 5 things, at least 5 things. This was part of my dissertation work back when I was in school with Ted Weesty. There's 5 things at least that God uses to grow faith, to grow elders, to grow people with gray hair and great confidence in God. 5 things. Have you ever heard this? Okay, I'm going to give these to you real quick. This is a whole other sermon series, whatever Johnny wants to do with it, but let me just throw this out. Practical biblical teaching is an essential, non-negotiable part of growing big confidence in God. You got to be in it, you got to be under it, and have a steady diet of practical biblical teaching. That's just one aspect, though. Second is providential relationships. You got to have some God friends, folks. People that inspire and encourage you to become and to aspire to be more godly. David Winley's been that to me, my friend, for over a decade. They got to call you up and call you in to God. Practical biblical teaching, providential relationships, private disciplines. You got to have your own time with God. You got to invest and get your hands dirty for God's sake in his word and through prayer and with some other godly close friends, right? To leverage those providential relationships. Pivotal circumstances, those defining moments. Those defining moments. Now, they're going to come get you, but I've learned to help some guys create some of these. Places that are either going to leave you bitter or better. They never leave you where they find you. It may be the birth of a child with birth defects. It may be the promotion of your life you never really thought you'd get. The highs, the lows, those pivotal circumstances God uses to forge big, robust faith. Make sense? And then personal ministry. Personal ministry. And that's the one that I don't think we get the word out enough. Folks, you got to get out of the stands. See, we set up our sanctuaries these days to look more like auditoriums and concert venues. You got to get on the field to grow up. These days, I train. I don't teach anymore. Teaching is just offering knowledge. Training is getting people ready to go to battle. Does that make sense? So I'm sure I forgot one. Anytime I promise a list, I always forget one. So I'll review that later if you want to follow up on that. But folks, those things, and that last one is the one we're here talking about today. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. The church, not just your church, the church needs to be revitalized right now. We've gotten lethargic. The idea of being salt and light, really enhancing flavor and adding inspiration and direction to culture, man, we're not doing that job, are we? We need revitalizing. We need new life pumped into us, and I think the silver bullet is follow the fish. Follow the fish. Now, how do we do it? Well, if I had time and if I ever get invited back, we can talk more about that. Search has what I think is one of the simplest approaches to personal evangelism I've ever seen, and the bar is really low in terms of the intimidation factor, okay? Because we help you not be afraid of not having answers to their questions. That's where the apologetic part of our deal comes in. And all that means is I equip people to answer the why questions. And what's amazing, the more lost people I talk to, which is quite a few, the more similar the questions are. They're just a handful, to be honest, of objections and questions that people will ask you. And you can learn those answers. And then you don't have to be afraid of that. right? And because it's relational, we lower the intimidation factor of you feeling intrusive. We earn the right to be heard. That was an old Young Life saying as well. We earn the right to be heard by loving on people, by becoming their friend. Not just some sort of transaction, some scalp that I've got to hang from my belt for Jesus, but my friends. Do you have lost friends? Do you? Because you know what? You find what you look for. Have you been looking for lost friends? Most of us are just, the last year, have just been looking for a friend anywhere, any kind of friend, But you'll find what you look for. So please, I'm going to have to stop. So there's more we could say, but I'm going to stop with that. And I'm going to encourage you. Fish. And realize the best part of this verse to me, back to Matthew 4:19, follow me, and who's going to make you that? I will make you. I love this. It's a guarantee. He will enable. God does not call the able. God enables the called. He'll never call you to something that he won't get you through. He wants to help if you'll count on him. But to walk on water, you got to step out of the boat. Will you get out of the boat? He called a paralytic to fish. He called a prostitute to fish. He called a deaf guy to fish. He called a very wealthy tax collector to fish. He called a very educated Jew to fish. Will you fish? By his grace and for your glory. Fish. Let's pray. So God, I thank you for the privilege of being here this morning. Thanks for a pastor that loves you and loves these folks and God and loves your word. And I just pray, God, for the health and the impact of Trinity Chapel Bible Church. God, grow us that we might be useful, impactful in our generation. For your sake and by your strength we pray. Amen. Thank you.